So Infinity Pool's a movie that I can't stop thinking about. Whether it's the ambiguous ending, the horrifying turns the characters take, or the fact it makes the mundane insane, something about it just won't leave my head. From the first second I put it on, it just hypnotised me, and throughout its runtime I didn't check my phone or glance away from the screen. It's something I haven't felt since watching a Stanley Kubrick film, and this is easily my favourite movie of the year so far. Looking back at it, there's so much to unpack, and throughout this breakdown I'm going to be going through the movie's true meaning and also discussing what I took from the ending. Weirdly, I actually found myself relating to James a lot, and I actually think there's some key character traits in him that are universal on a human level. Now I will be talking about some of the plot points in the movie as they happen, but I'm going to take it that you've seen the film and that you're up to speed with its story. I don't want to just recap the plot because there's so much to talk about. I think the best place to start is actually the movie's ending. In it we watch as James ends up returning back to the resort that acted as a place in which he was reborn after going through a nightmarish week. At this point James has now decided not to go back to his wife, and instead he feels fully independent and able to embrace his true self. This is hinted at by the line from Gabby in which she says,
"Men are trained by women like Em to see themselves as weak. It can take some work to undo. It can take some blood."
Now the group stage everything so that in the end he has to destroy personification of himself, and the week should be seen as an initiation trial. As soon as he does that, he's freed, and we even see a switch in Gabby in which she goes from a complete psychopath to a nurturing figure.
Yeah! Jamesy! Come on!
A few moments later.
She accused Em of doing a number on him and is having to go to the opposite extreme in order to reverse this. I'm not saying that she's a good person or anything, and at this moment I think the movie's telling us that James has just gone from one woman who tells him how to act into the arms of another. Might sound like I'm making Em sound bad too, but unlike the group, she genuinely cares for him. However, James clearly feels that she holds him down as we get a moment where he hallucinates a scene with everyone standing around him. They're all wearing their masks, it's a sort of recreation of the orgy, and Emma's sat on top of him with her hands around his throat. Now, the entire movie is about him stepping out from under the control of others in order to become his own person. In the airport, we get him staring at his name on his ticket and passport, and this is seen as being his identity. However, he uses neither, and he goes back to sit in the rain by himself so he can be alone. Now, in order to talk about this transformation, we have to go back to the beginning of the movie when we first meet him. The film opens with James and Em out on a trip, which he's hoping will inspire him to break free of the writer's block he's suffered for the past 6 years. James wrote a debut novel that wasn't very well received, and it failed both critically and commercially, completely killing his self-esteem. Even his wife Em doesn't really regard him as being anything special, and you get the idea that the pair are only together because she was rebelling against her dad who didn't want her marrying a writer. James feels like a failure, and he's desperately hoping this trip will spark up some inspiration within him that will allow him to somewhat prove his doubters wrong. Now, I've spoken about this with a lot of different people who've built themselves up from nothing, and we all agree that there's one key trait needed in order to become a self-made success. At some point in your life, you have to have someone who's doubted you, and it's built a mentality into you that says, "I'll show them." This motivates you to work longer hours, push harder and prove them wrong, which can take you from being apathetic to being inspired. Now, I feel like this is something that exists not only within James, but also within the movie's creator. Though you might not be able to pick Brandon Cronenberg out of a lineup, I think that everyone will at least have heard his surname. Now, whenever I've seen his name mentioned in an article, it's often followed by a short paragraph of text talking about his world-famous father. Looking at the film, you could even see James as a metaphor for Brandon, and he's very much trying to prove himself with this movie, just like how James is. I don't think it's a criticism that James's book is said to have only been published because of Em's dad, and this may be Brandon fighting back against some of the criticism he faces. Nepotism is a big buzzword at the moment, but I think this film proves that he's easily able to step out of his father's shadow. Now, Em can very much be seen as being one of the people that doubts and makes fun of James, and at one point she even jokes that she's finally met someone from his fan club when they come across Gabby. At the dinner table, she says that she feels like she's a charitable organisation at this point, which clearly sits as a sore note for the character. James leaving her at the end is very much in breaking free and going out to be his own man because he realises the person he is doesn't have a future with her. If we look at the bus scene when everyone's leaving, we can catch the rest of the characters all together in their couples. They're acting like they're returning to normality, and the fact their partners don't freak out like M did is because they accept both the good and bad sides of their partners. They embrace the chaos and support each other throughout the debauchery, but they're also able to tone it down and return back to a normal life. James isn't able to do this because he hasn't really found someone who accepts him, and this is why he doesn't go back to M. He's someone who has to hide his passport from her, and this also represents a side of him that he feels like he can't show her. She sees what he gets up to as being disgusting, whereas the rest of the group are far more accepting of who he is. The use of the masks also symbolises who they are and the darkness hidden within them that's now fully on the surface. Now the movie deals with duplicates throughout, and I think that this speaks to the double-sided personality that we all have. Humans have two sides to them, and we all show one side publicly whilst having our own private side that only we know about. Often referred to as the shadow self, this is a darker side that I think the characters end up showing as they realise they can get away with more and more. Now, Sigmund Freud also came up with the idea of the ego and the id. The ego is the more rational part of us, whereas the id is the primitive side. Ego plays a big part in the film, and Gabby even gets James on her side by massaging his over his crap book. It was crap, to be fair.
Seeming to recognise his own lack of talent, newcomer James W. Foster overcompensates with pretension.
It's probably similar to a review that Brandon himself has got before, and like I said before, James might be a metaphor for him. Now James ends up coming face to face with his own id at the end of the film, and this primitive version of him is referred to as the dog. Gabby says that he has to sacrifice the dog, and this ties back to the idea of the new James being born through blood. He kills and he conquers this, and once more goes back to being the rational ego that he was at the start of the movie. However, you could also see him returning to the resort as being something that showcases he accepts who he is, and that the person he became here is the man he's become. Either way, I think both could be taken as valid interpretations, with him being reborn come the death of the dog. This idea of birth is shown literally in the film with him sucking on Gabby's, which is of course symbolic of a baby being breastfed. Now I also think the bus journey is highly symbolic of this because he's sat on his own whilst the others aren't. There and there, along with their quote-unquote double, who we know is just the same as them. Now doubles of course also play a major role in the movie as well. In the movie we of course watch James and his wife Em meet a couple whilst they're on holiday, and this happens in the fictional country which is called Latulka. James accidentally kills a local farmer through drunk driving, and he discovers that the Latulkans have certain rules and traditions. Someone kills someone, then their son has the right to execute the person who did it, and James is then sentenced to death. However, there's another aspect that enters into the equation, and this only happens with the rich and wealthy. Those that can afford to pay have a clone created that possesses all their memories, and that person is then killed whilst the other version watches on. Now what it boils down to is basically the idea that the elite can do what they want and get away with it because they have the money to pay for it. When the movie ended, my wife actually turned to me and asked what the film was about, and I replied by saying, and I quote, "It's a metaphor for a lad's holiday I had in Magaluf when I was 17. Now, what I mean by that is that I went abroad to the booze capital, spent the week basically doing what I wanted, was a bit of a disgrace, and then came home like nothing had happened. You'll often see reports of people going out to places like this, and it's clear that the tourists just show up, treat the place like a playground, and then they end up leaving. Goes without saying that the locals get pretty fed up with it, but they rely on the tourism, so they have to allow it to happen so that they can afford to live. Early on in the movie, we even catch one of the locals driving a quad bike around dangerously, and this is part of a protest to stop the tourists from acting like this. However, their entire ecosystem relies on it, so they have to allow it to happen and let these events play out. Now, Detective Thresh is a great example of this, and we discover that he's pretty much made a business out of selling the doppelgangers. He doesn't really do much detecting, and instead just wheels them in, gets the money, kills the doppelganger, and then lets them free without repercussions. They then continue to do what they want, he makes a buck, rinse and repeat. And of course speaks to the corruption that exists on the island, and also about how the elite are so powerful that they can buy their way out of anything. Everything is given a green light if you've got the green, and we've actually seen some things like this happen in real life. If you live in England, then I'm sure you'll probably know about the case of Harry Dunn and also Anne Sekulis. She was over here from the US, and after driving on the wrong side of the road, she hit and killed Harry and then sped off. Now this would normally be a straightforward matter, but Anne's husband was a CIA operative, and thus she got diplomatic immunity. Anne then fled the country and returned to the US, and they refused to extradite her out here. It was a long and agonizing time for the family to try and get justice, and in the end, Anne didn't face any jail time, even though she was found guilty. Now, there's obviously a lot of political things involved with that, and I won't wade too far into, as I'm sure there'll be people there saying, well, that's just how diplomatic immunity works, mate. Ask yourself, though, if this was one of your family members that was killed in a hit and run, and the person who did it just left the country, would you feel the same about it? Probably not, but we see the rich in the film can basically do what they want because of their position. Now, that question of empathy takes me into my next point, which we see demonstrated beautifully within the film. The fact is, the central characters that we follow simply don't possess this, and that's because in this world, they don't need it to fit in. They have complete freedom from consequences, and therefore don't have to view anything as being something that they should actually care about. Now, this is shown perfectly by Gabby berating James as the car follows him.
This whole time we've been laughing at you. One shitty book, 6 years ago, that nobody read. You're so vain, James, to actually believe that we read it. It's sort of funny, but really more than anything, it's depressing.
Her just sitting, sipping wine, screaming James is the thing that stands out to me most in this movie, and it shows just how heartless of a person that she is. Here's a guy that she got to leave his wife and pretended to be a fan of his in order to seduce him and get him to turn to the dark side. Here though, she reveals that she didn't even read his book, then busts out a review that looks like the YouTube comment section when I make a video like this. Now, Gabby is such a detestable villain because she thinks she's something special because of what she can do with her money. She's just someone who works in commercials and, in the grand scheme of things, probably isn't that important. However, because she's rich and beautiful, she has been unable to act like how she wants, and she treats everyone horrendously. The character can't imagine what it's like to be the people she looks down on, and she possesses absolutely no empathy. Now, though we're meant to feel bad for James, he's also done the same thing too. This guy is shown no empathy throughout the movie, and this is showcased in his actions against M and also his doppelganger. There's a brilliant scene in the movie where we watch as the people in the group think they're going to get executed, and this is without the ability to buy their way out of trouble. They're absolutely terrified, we see them lined up and get killed, and then get the brilliant twist that the originals are fine, and just watching this play out. Those getting executed can't take it though, and it cements how the originals would truly be if they were on the other side. It's possible that facing their own death's what broke them, and it's difficult to imagine how you'd act upon seeing yourself die. Either way though, this empowers them, and they're entertained by watching their own ends. Now, why this is important is because we learn the doppelgangers are exact copies of the original. They have their memories and personalities, and for all intents and purposes are one-for-one copies. The terror in this moment that we see pouring out of the doppelgangers is the same terror the originals would feel if they were in this situation, but they sit there laughing. They can't even empathize with someone who is them, and instead sit there laughing as they watch their own deaths. Now, I know one of the major questions around the movie is whether James is actually James at the end, or if he's a clone that doesn't realize it. One of the group even brings this up, and I've seen a couple of comments saying that the cuts on his faces could show that he's been switched out. I don't think they line up with the dog though, and all in all, I don't actually think that it matters. The fact is, they're perfect copies, so it shouldn't make a difference who is who and what is what. These people are still willing to torture versions of themselves, and therefore they're not people that we should like a side with. Now, I do think that when it's revealed James has been beating on himself, that he comes to this realization. He locks himself in his room and decides to return home, which is when Gabby and the group start to physically and mentally torture him. Now, I did notice that there's probably some parallels between Gabby getting James's DNA after he's just finished urinating, and the authorities taking DNA, but that might not be the case. She of course does this without consent, and James doesn't fully realise what he's getting into, but it goes too far, and in the end he gets pulled in deeper. He also urinates on the dog's face before the reveal, so it's like both these moments of peeing see turns in the character. Now, the trip to me as a whole though is definitely an initiation trial that they put people through in order to try and convert them to their hedonistic ways. We never get this confirmed in the film, but Gabby says they put people through this kind of stuff every year, and this time around, James is their victim. Come the final goodbye, Gabby says she hopes to see James next year, and this implies that this is something that the group do annually. Therefore, you can draw the conclusions that the rest of the group were couples like James and Em, who were tortured like this before they were converted. James is ordered to shoot the dog at the end, and she refers to this as creating a transformation. The others likely went through this too, and they were then reborn just like how James is. In the end, he's killed his id, and this means that he can be the man he truly is. Em seeing his reaction to this double death showed her what he was really like, but with her out of the picture, he no longer needs to suppress this. He's broken free of the group because he doesn't really see himself as being part of them and returned as his own man to the place he can be himself. Everyone on the bus is happy to put a lid on this and shut it off, but James isn't able to leave this all behind. Looking at the bus trip, there's also somewhat of a layer of sadness to it, as we have Gabby's husband Albin saying he has to return to work immediately upon them touching back down. Gabby says,
And I'm behind him.
Which means I'll be eating alone and rearranging the house again.
Please don't.
And there's this kind of idea that she's off to face months and months of bitter loneliness before she returns to this place where she can actually be herself. It explains why she gets an obsession over James, as he does seem to at least be interested in her outside of all the partying. Now there's actually a nature versus nurture motif to this entire thing as well, as you can question whether James was always like this or if he was moulded to be like this by Gabby's actions. Personally, I lean in more with the idea that he was always f***ed up, but he just found a way to do it without repercussions. Him watching his own executionism, seeing himself getting away with murder, and he goes back to the resort because to him that's returning home. It's a perfect way to close out the film, and it shows the journey that he's gone on. And what's brilliant about the movie is that you can completely toss this interpretation to the side and see it as being something completely different. The movie has a lot of things you can talk about, and it's one of those films I just had to discuss. I looked at a lot of other videos on it and saw the view count wasn't that high, which in most cases would stop me from spending time and money on writing it and paying editors. However, like I said, this film's completely blown me away, and I hope this video has been as enjoyable for you as it was for me. Drop your comments below, and if you enjoyed it, please hit the thumbs up button, and don't forget to subscribe for breakdowns like this every day. If you want something else to watch, then we've got a video on screen right now. With that out of the way, I've been Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.